In the soft morning light filtering through the lace curtains of my sister-in-law Nina's elegant dining room in her Nashville home, my husband James leaned forward, his voice low and teasing. "Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey?" he asked, a peculiar smile curling his lips, a smile that never quite reached his eyes, leaving them cold and unreadable. The polished mahogany table, set for our monthly family brunch, gleamed under the chandelier, but the air felt heavy with unspoken tension. The coffee cup before me, adorned with delicate floral patterns, emitted a strange, almost metallic odor that twisted my stomach into knots. My name is Christina, and at 29, I never imagined I'd find myself scrutinizing every sip and bite, wondering if my own husband might be trying to poison me. 3 years of marriage had taught me to tread carefully, especially around Nina's meticulously orchestrated gatherings. Too many accidental bouts of food poisoning, stomach cramps after her famous casseroles, nausea following her homemade lemonade, had left me wary. Each incident was accompanied by Nina's innocent smile, mirrored now by James as he nudged the coffee closer. "How thoughtful of you," I replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my lips. My mind raced, cataloging the odd scent wafting from the cup, sharp, chemical, unlike any coffee I'd ever encountered. It reminded me of last month's ordeal, when a cup of tea at Nina's house sent me to urgent care with symptoms the doctors couldn't pinpoint. Nina had insisted she'd brewed it the same way she always did, her eyes wide with feigned concern. Now, as I sat at her table, her gaze was fixed on me, her spoon lazily stirring her own, untouched coffee. "James has become quite the barista lately," Nina said, her voice smooth but laced with a smirk. "He's been experimenting with different brewing methods, just for you." The way she emphasized "for you" sent a shiver down my spine, like a cold finger tracing my back. I'd noticed James spending more time at Nina's lately, under the guise of planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. But the whispered conversations that halted when I entered the room, the cryptic texts I'd glimpsed on his phone, and now this coffee with its unsettling aroma, they all pointed to something sinister. I lifted the cup, pretending to sip while watching their faces. James's eyes flickered to Nina, a quick, conspiratorial glance that tightened the knot in my chest. My pulse quickened. I needed a way out. "Oh, would you look at that?" I said, making a show of checking my phone. "I need to make a quick work call. Nina, mind if I use your study?" As I passed her place setting, I deliberately stumbled, my hand brushing against a table. In the split second of chaos, I swapped our coffee cups, steadying myself with an exaggerated gasp. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening up. "I'm such a klutz sometimes." Nina waved off my apology with a tight smile, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Just try not to break anything in the study," she said, her voice clipped. I nodded, my heart pounding like a drum as I hurried toward the study, leaving the door slightly ajar. From the doorway, I could still see the dining table, the cups now switched, mine with its strange metallic scent now in front of Nina. I gripped my phone, ready to record, and waited. Nina lifted the coffee to her lips, and my stomach clenched with a mix of dread and anticipation. Part of me wanted to rush back, to knock the cup from her hand, but I needed answers. Too many nights spent in emergency rooms, doubled over in agony after meals with them, had eroded my trust. It hadn't always been this way. When I met James at a friend's wedding in Nashville 3 years ago, he was the picture of charm, attentive, warm, with a laugh that made my heart flutter. Nina, too, had seemed welcoming, inviting me to family brunches and offering to help plan our wedding. But looking back, the red flags were there. Nina's accidental spills on my dress at important events, the extra seasoning in my food when she cooked, the upset stomachs and mild allergic reactions that James always dismissed with a casual, "Maybe it was something you ate earlier." The worst was 2 months ago, when a breakfast at Nina's landed me in the hospital. The doctors found traces of an unidentifiable substance in my system, but James insisted I must have taken expired medication. I knew better now. As I watched from the study, Nina took another sip, and a slight tremor shook her hand. She set the cup down, her face paling to a ghostly white. "James," she said, her voice quivering, "something's wrong." James looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from casual indifference to horror as he realized which cup she held. He leapt to his feet, knocking over his chair with a clatter. "Nina, what's happening?" he stammered. Nina tried to stand, but her legs buckled, and she grabbed the table's edge for support. I feel." Her words faltered as her hands shook violently. "James, what did you put in that coffee?" I stepped out of the study, my phone still recording, its red light a steady beacon in my trembling hand. James was at Nina's side now, his face ashen. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered, but in the deafening silence of the dining room, his words rang like a confession. Nina's eyes widened, a mix of realization and fear flashing across her face. "Call an ambulance," she gasped, sliding to the floor, her body racked with tremors. "Please, I can't." I dialed 911, my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. "Emergency services, yes, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive," I said clearly, keeping the phone's camera trained on them. "My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious, but experiencing tremors." Nina's eyes locked onto mine, the usual cold calculation replaced by raw panic. "Christina," she gasped, "you switched, you knew." "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way," the dispatcher assured me. "Please stay on the line." James grew more frantic, his hands hovering uselessly over Nina. "Nina, what's happening?" "That wasn't supposed to. It wasn't meant for." "Shut up, James." Nina snapped through gritted teeth, her anger momentarily overriding her distress. "This is all your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced." My blood ran cold. The board meeting, where I was set to present a major client proposal, the same account Nina had been vying for at our rival firms. The pieces fell into place with chilling clarity. "The tea last month," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. "That was supposed to keep me home during the Johnson contract presentation, wasn't it? And the breakfast 2 months ago. Those weren't accidents, were they?" Nina's face contorted with another wave of pain, her hands clutching her stomach as she doubled over. "The tea, it was supposed to make you miss the presentation," she admitted, her voice slurring. "But you went anyway. James said we just needed to discredit you, make clients think you were unreliable." The wail of sirens grew louder outside, cutting through the tension like a blade. James backed away, his eyes darting between us. "Nina, stop talking. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Nina spat, her words barely coherent now. "We've been planning this for months, ever since Christina started outshining me at every client meeting. You were supposed to make sure she drank it." The truth hung heavy in the air as the paramedics burst through the door, their boots thudding against Nina's pristine hardwood floors. I stepped back, my phone still recording, capturing every word, every glance, every tremor. The coffee, cold and untouched on the table where I'd left it, seemed to pulse with the weight of their betrayal. As the paramedics tended to Nina, I knew this was only the beginning. My marriage, my trust, my safety had all been shattered, but I had the evidence I needed to ensure they'd never hurt me again. The front door of Nina's pristine Nashville home burst open with a force that rattled the crystal chandelier above the dining room, and I swiftly stepped aside, my heart pounding like a metronome as the paramedics stormed in. Their boots thudded against the polished hardwood, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had settled after Nina's collapse. As they loaded her trembling form onto a stretcher, I stopped the recording on my phone, my fingers trembling but deliberate as I emailed the video to my private account and then forwarded it to my lawyer, ensuring the evidence was secure. James stood frozen near the dining table, his eyes wide with panic, watching as the carefully woven threads of his scheme unraveled before him. "I'll ride with her to the hospital," I told the paramedics, my voice firm despite the storm of emotions raging within me. "After all, I need to make sure my sister-in-law gets the proper treatment." My gaze locked onto James's, his terrified expression betraying the guilt he could no longer hide. And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee. I added, each word sharp and deliberate, cutting through the air like a blade. At Nashville General Hospital, the emergency room buzzed with frenetic energy, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, and the low hum of urgent conversations. I sat in the waiting room, clutching my phone as if it were a lifeline, replaying the recording of Nina's confession in my mind. Her trembling voice, the raw fear in her eyes as she realized she'd drunk the poison coffee. It was undeniable proof that my suspicions weren't just paranoia. 3 years of marriage, countless unexplained illnesses, and now this, a deliberate attempt to sabotage me, orchestrated by the two people I should have trusted most. Family of Nina Anderson? A nurse called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. I stood, noting James's conspicuous absence. He'd mumbled something about parking the car 20 minutes ago, his face pale and sweaty, and hadn't returned. "I'm her sister-in-law," I said, following the nurse through the double doors, the sterile scent of antiseptic stinging my nose. "How is she?" "She's stabilized, but we found concerning levels of toxins in her system," the nurse replied, her expression grave as she led me down a fluorescent-lit corridor. "The doctor would like to speak with you about some unusual findings in her blood work." Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to pierce through facades, waited outside Nina's room, her tablet glowing with data. "Mrs. Bennett, could you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill?" she asked, her tone professional but tinged with suspicion. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I pulled out my phone. "I think you should listen to this first," I said, playing the recording from brunch. As Nina's slurred confession and James's panicked whispers filled the air, Dr. Phillips's expression shifted from concern to alarm, her fingers tightening around her tablet. "This is very serious," she said, scribbling notes with quick, precise movements. "The substance we found in her system isn't something that accidentally ends up in coffee. We're looking at deliberate contamination." Just then, James appeared at the end of the hallway, his face slick with sweat, his shirt rumpled as if he'd been pacing outside. He froze when he overheard Dr. Phillips's words, his eyes darting between us like a cornered animal. "Christina," he stammered, taking a tentative step forward. "Let me explain." "Stay back," Dr. Phillips interrupted, her voice sharp as she pressed the nurse's call button. "Security to room 412, please." James raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his voice trembling. "This is all a misunderstanding." Nina was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. "Really?" I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath my skin. I pulled up the texts I'd discovered on his phone last week, messages I'd secretly forwarded to myself after finding a vial of strange liquid in his desk drawer. "So these messages between you and Nina about making sure I was out of commission before the Henderson presentation were just friendly conversation?" His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You went through my phone?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "After I found that vial in your desk." "Yes, I did," I replied, turning to Dr. Phillips. "Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with unexplained symptoms. I'd like to know if they match what you found in Nina's system today." Dr. Phillips's eyes narrowed, her professional demeanor sharpening with resolve. "We'll need to run some tests to compare," she said. "Security will ensure your husband remains available for questioning." 2 burly security guards appeared, positioning themselves on either side of James, who looked like a man watching his world collapse. "Nina and I," he stammered, his voice cracking, "we were just trying to help you slow down. You were working too hard, taking all the big clients. Nina said if we could just make you take some time off." "By poisoning me?" My voice was steady, but my hands shook with rage, the betrayal cutting deeper than any physical pain. "How long have you been doing this, James? Was it you who tampered with my food at the Christmas party too?" His silence was deafening, a confession in itself. Behind him, through the glass window of Nina's room, I could see her lying in the hospital bed, connected to monitors, her earlier bravado replaced by the raw fear of someone whose schemes had backfired spectacularly. "Detective Mendoza is on her way," Dr. Phillips said quietly, her eyes flicking between us. She'll want to take statements from everyone involved. Detective Mendoza arrived within the hour, her presence commanding the sterile hospital corridor. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for handling domestic abuse cases, she carried an air of quiet authority, her dark eyes assessing the scene with precision. I played the brunch recording for her and showed her the incriminating text messages, watching as her expression hardened with each piece of evidence. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, reviewing her notes, "you mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents?" I opened a document on my phone, one I'd been quietly maintaining for months, a lifeline born of suspicion and survival. The first time was in February, after a dinner at Nina's house, severe stomach pains and dizziness. I began, my voice steady as I recounted the pattern. The second was in April, the tea incident. Then in June, after breakfast with them. Each time, the symptoms were similar but just different enough that doctors couldn't pinpoint a cause. Detective Mendoza's eyes narrowed as she scanned my detailed log of dates, symptoms, and circumstances. "And you've been keeping records?" she asked, her tone a mix of admiration and concern. "Ever since I noticed the pattern," I said, hesitating before pulling a second phone from my purse, a burner I'd started carrying for safety. I also began using a backup phone with a different number. I recorded conversations when I was around them. They're careful not to be explicit, but some are damning. I played a recording from a week ago, Nina's voice crisp and calculating. "The Henderson account is worth millions, James. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough." James's response followed, cold and complicit. "I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation." Detective Mendoza's expression darkened, her pen pausing over her notebook. Through the window, I saw Nina, now awake in her hospital bed, her eyes darting nervously as if she sensed the net tightening around her. The hospital was running toxicology screens, and Dr. Phillips had already identified several unnatural substances in Nina's system. "We'll need samples from your home as well," the detective said, her voice firm. A commotion erupted down the hall. James was arguing with the security guards, his voice rising in desperation. "I need to speak with my wife," he shouted. "Christina, please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you." Detective Mendoza stepped between us, her presence a barrier. "Mr. Bennett, you're not helping your case. We've already found evidence of premeditated intent." James let out a hollow laugh, the sound echoing through the corridor like a ghost of his former charm. "We were just trying to slow her down," he insisted. "She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. Nina said, if we could just make her take some time off." "By poisoning her?" Detective Mendoza's voice was sharp, cutting through his excuses. "That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder." The color drained from James's face, his protests dying in his throat. "Murder? No, that's not. We never meant to." "Then what exactly did you mean to do?" I asked, my voice calm but laced with steel. "When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen?" His silence was a chasm, swallowing any remnants of trust I'd once had. Through Nina's hospital room window, I saw her watching, her face a mask of fear and calculation, as if she were still scheming, searching for a way to spin months of systematic poisoning into something defensible. "We'll need both of their phones," Detective Mendoza told the security guards, her voice authoritative. "And I want officers posted at both doors. Nobody leaves until we get the toxicology results." Dr. Phillips entered Nina's room, her tablet glowing with the latest test results, her expression grim. Detective Mendoza and I followed, while James remained outside, flanked by the guards. Nina tried to sit up straighter in her hospital bed, but the lingering tremors betrayed her weakness. Her eyes flicked to me, then to the detective, a flicker of defiance, warring with fear. The truth hung heavy in the sterile air, a reckoning for every spiked meal, every calculated betrayal. As the monitors beeped steadily behind Nina, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. The evidence was irrefutable, the recordings and texts a noose tightening around their lies. Whatever happened next, divorce, criminal charges, or both, I was no longer the prey in their twisted game. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of fear lift, replaced by the certainty that justice was within reach. Dr. Phillips stood at the foot of Nina's hospital bed, her voice clinical, yet weighted with the gravity of her findings. The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several substances, she announced, her eyes flicking to the tablet in her hands. Most concerning is the presence of a compound typically used in pharmaceutical testing, a substance the general public should not have access to. Nina's face, already pale from her ordeal, turned ghostly white, her eyes darting to the window where James stood, his silhouette slumped in defeat. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice trembling. James said it was just something to cause mild symptoms. Mild symptoms, Detective Mendoza interjected, flipping open her notebook with a sharp snap. Her dark eyes bored into Nina, unyielding. "Like the ones your sister-in-law, Christina, experienced over the past 6 months?" Before Nina could respond, the hospital room door swung open and another detective entered, holding a clear evidence bag that glinted under the fluorescent lights. "We found these in Mr. Bennett's office desk at the Anderson marketing firm," he said, presenting several small bottles with clinical labels, alongside a notebook filled with meticulous entries about dosages and reactions. My knees weakened as the full scope of their betrayal sank in, a cold wave washing over me. "You are documenting everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, like I was some kind of experiment. The realization hit like a physical blow. Every bout of nausea, every hospital visit, had been part of a calculated plan, recorded with chilling precision. "It wasn't like that," Nina protested, but her voice wavered, lacking the conviction of her usual polished demeanor. "We just needed to track what worked. The first few attempts weren't effective enough. You kept showing up to meetings anyway. So you increased the dosages," Detective Mendoza concluded, her tone icy as she examined the bottles, their labels stark and clinical. "Did you know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations?" The room fell silent, the only sound the steady beep of Nina's heart monitor. Outside, through the glass window, I saw James sink into a chair in the hallway, his head buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The weight of their actions seemed to press down on him, a man unraveling under the gaze of truth. I stepped forward, my voice slow and deliberate as the pieces clicked into place. "The Henderson account," I said, my eyes locked on Nina's. "It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? You needed me out of the way permanently because the client specifically requested me as their lead." Nina's face contorted, a mix of anger and fear twisting her features. "You are ruining everything I built," she spat, her voice low but venomous. "I worked for years to cultivate that client portfolio, and then you show up, and suddenly everyone wants to work with you instead." James said he could fix it. "By killing me?" The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation, each syllable a hammer striking the fragile remains of our family ties. "We weren't trying to," Nina began, but Dr. Phillips cut her off, her voice sharp and authoritative. "The concentration in the coffee you drank today," the doctor said, looking directly at Nina, "was significantly higher than the samples we analyzed from Mrs. Bennett's earlier hospital visits. If she had consumed it, the outcome could have been severe, possibly fatal." Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer, her expression resolute. "We'll need a full warrant for both their homes and offices. Contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles and find out how they obtained these substances." Nina slumped back against her pillows, the fight draining from her like water from a cracked vase. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "James kept saying we just needed one more try." I stepped closer to her bed, my hands trembling but my voice steady, fueled by months of suppressed fear and betrayal. "Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I lost, you were both there, watching, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. What kind of people does that make you?" The silence that followed was deafening, a void filled only by the distant hum of the hospital and the faint clink of handcuffs as officers approached James in the hallway. Nina stared at her hands, unable to meet my gaze, her fingers twisting the hospital blanket. Outside, I heard an officer's voice, firm and procedural. "Reading James's rights. You have the right to remain silent." "Detective," I said, turning away from Nina, my resolve hardening like steel. "I'm ready to make my formal statement now." The trial stretched over 3 grueling weeks, each day in the Nashville courtroom feeling like an eternity. I sat in the gallery, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, watching as the prosecution built an airtight case against James and Nina. The evidence was overwhelming. The labeled bottles from James's office, their detailed notes cataloging each poisoning attempt, the recorded conversations, and the incriminating text messages plotting my downfall. What struck me most was their demeanor. Nina, once the epitome of polish and confidence, looked diminished in her defendant's chair, her tailored suits replaced by a plain jumpsuit, her eyes hollow. James couldn't even look at me, his gaze fixed on the courtroom floor, his once charming smile replaced by a grim line. Expert witnesses, including Dr. Phillips, provided damning testimony. She presented a meticulous analysis, her charts and data illustrating how the dosages had escalated over time, a clear pattern of intent to cause serious harm. A representative from the pharmaceutical company confirmed that James had stolen the compounds through a college friend in their research department, a betrayal that extended beyond our family. The defendant showed a calculated pattern of behavior, the prosecutor argued in her closing statement, her voice resonant with conviction. This wasn't just corporate sabotage. It was a systematic attempt to harm Mrs. Christina Bennett, with a clear escalation that could have resulted in her death. When the verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy, I felt no joy, only a profound relief that washed over me like a cool breeze after a storm. The judge's words echoed through the silent courtroom. The premeditated nature of these actions, carried out against a family member over an extended period, demands the maximum sentence. I watched as James and Nina were led away in handcuffs, their faces masks of disbelief and resignation. Greed and jealousy had twisted 2 people I once trusted into something unrecognizable, their business, reputations, and freedom sacrificed in their obsessive quest to destroy me. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, the weight of a microphone in my hand and the eyes of hundreds on me. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the kind of opportunity Nina and James had tried to sabotage. The Henderson account, the catalyst for their betrayal, had led to a cascade of major clients, establishing me as one of the top marketing executives in the region. Success isn't just about talent or hard work. I began, my voice steady as I looked out at the sea of faces, some eager, some skeptical. It's about integrity, about building genuine relationships based on trust. I paused, letting the words settle, their weight anchoring me. Sometimes, the biggest threats to our success come from those closest to us. But surviving those challenges makes us stronger, more resilient, and more determined to rise above. After my speech, a group of young professionals approached, their questions brimming with ambition. One woman, her eyes bright with determination, asked how I'd maintained my composure through such a harrowing ordeal. I focused on what I could control, I told her, my voice soft but firm. I gathered evidence, trusted my instincts, and refused to let fear stop me from pursuing my goals. That evening, an email from the Henderson client arrived, confirming a 3-year contract renewal. I smiled, the glow of my laptop screen casting a warm light across my office. The local paper had published a brief article that morning about Nina and James beginning their prison sentences, but I didn't read it. Instead, I turned my attention to a proposal for a new client project, my pen moving steadily across the page. The best revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about moving forward, thriving despite those who tried to hold me back, and building a future defined by my own strength and integrity. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribe for more.